On March 15, 1935, a large number of press representatives gathered at Stockholm Central Station. Reporters and photographers were waiting for the arrival of a train from Copenhagen. And it was supposed to be the Crown Prince of Denmark, Frederik, traveling to meet his beloved Swedish Princess Ingrid. But when the train stopped at the platform, the Crown Prince was nowhere to be found. He had tricked the journalists and had already gotten off at Södertälje, where Ingrid met him and drove him to Stockholm Palace in her car. She loved to drive herself, and without any attention from outsiders, they made their way to the palace. A couple of hours later, the Swedish and Danish courts issued a joint communique. By agreement of the crowns, Princess Ingrid of Sweden has today become engaged to Crown Prince Frederik of Denmark. Ingrid was born at Stockholm Palace on March 28, 1910. At 8 in the morning on the island of Skeppsholmen in Stockholm, 28 cannon shots were fired in honor of the princess's birth. She turned out to be the only daughter of the future Swedish King Gustav VI, Adolf, and Crown Princess Margaret of Connaught. The Bernadotte family had previously had two sons, Gustav Adolf and Sigvard. Later, two more younger brothers of Ingrid Bertil and Carl Johan would be born. Princess Ingrid, who was called San within the family, had a very close relationship with her mother. Both she and those around her considered Margaret a loving mother, a creative person, a disciplined woman, and someone greatly valued by everyone. Therefore, for the very young Ingrid, it was a heavy blow that left a lifelong mark when, on the morning of May 1st, 1920, Crown Princess Margaret died after a short illness. At the time, this young 38-year-old woman was expecting her sixth child. Years later, recalling the events of her life, Ingrid said that at that time she shed all the tears she had. After that, she could no longer cry for the rest of her life. She was only 10 years old, left without a mother, and her once happy childhood came to an end. After her mother's death, Ingrid changed. At the same time, she became both a reserved young woman and conscientious in fulfilling her duties. Diligent, she held herself to very high standards. Ingrid began living by the motto, "Do what needs to be done." Her father, Gustav Adolf, who was still the crown prince at that time, remarried in 1923. Her father's decision infuriated Ingrid, painfully affecting the teenager. She perceived her father's second marriage as a kind of betrayal of her deceased mother. Therefore, with Aunt Louise Mountbatten, who became the new wife and future queen of Sweden, Ingrid never had particularly warm relations. In her youth, Ingrid did not live as a recluse, but was a modern and active young woman. She rode horses, skied and skated, and was a good tennis player. The princess even participated in sports competitions under the pseudonym Miss San. She received a good education, which included knowledge of history, political science, several languages, and art. During her student years, the princess spent some time in Paris and Rome, and in 1934, she went on a 5-month trip to the Middle East with her father and brother, Prince Bertil. Overall, Ingrid behaved as a rather liberated young woman for her time. She got a short haircut, obtained a driver's license, and had her own style, certainly influencing trends in the fashion world. Many clearly saw her as a good match. For some time, the press linked the princess with the English Prince Edward, who briefly became King Edward VIII of Great Britain in 1936. But fate had something else in store for Ingrid involving another kingdom. Her romance with the Danish Crown Prince Frederik began to blossom in 1933, and their engagement, as already mentioned, was announced in 1935, shortly before Ingrid's 25th birthday. The wedding took place on May 24th of the same year at Storkyrkan in Stockholm, with over 1,000 guests invited. Representatives of most European royal houses witnessed the event. First and foremost, Frederik was the Danish crown prince, and thus one day he was destined to inherit the Danish crown from his father, Christian X. At the time of their marriage, Frederik was more popular than many other members of the royal family. At the age of 10, he made it clear that he intended to become a sailor, and he did so despite his father's wishes. During his years in the Navy, Frederik acquired his famous tattoos. The life of a sailor helped him understand life in general and how to behave informally in society, which was not typical for people of his standing. Many Danes still consider him the most amiable and approachable king in Denmark's history. The Danish people also welcomed the prince's chosen one, the elegant and modern Swedish princess Ingrid. And it wasn't just the people. Although her father-in-law, Christian X, was a strict and hot-tempered man, Ingrid quickly developed warm and close relations with him. A sign of this is the fact that the princess was allowed to borrow the Danish royal ship Dannebrog, something her husband Frederik had never dared to ask his father for. It was on this ship that the newlyweds sailed from Stockholm to Copenhagen. The Danish people often made light of their neighboring country and its inhabitants. Now, of course, the question arose as to whether Ingrid could truly become a real Dane in the future. Some perceived her as rather reserved and inclined toward formality, although there was never any open criticism of the future queen in society. Ingrid intended to quickly learn the Danish language and become familiar with Danish history, politics, and culture. Over time, she learned to speak Danish fluently in addition to already knowing English and Italian. The princess also participated in many charitable projects, particularly those for children and youth. Since the Danish king and queen disliked foreign trips, the popular crown prince couple quickly and happily took on many such duties. Besides visits to other countries, in 1939, they went on a 2-month trip to the United States where, among other things, they dined with President Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. Christian X died on April 20th, 1947. He had been ill for a long time and never recovered from a fall from a horse in central Copenhagen. Ingrid and Frederik were well prepared to ascend to the throne of Denmark by then. When they appeared as the new king and queen on the balcony of Amalienborg Palace, people cheered them. Frederik IX proclaimed, "Now we will both take the reins of power and continue to rule in the same spirit as the previous royal couple." He then publicly kissed his queen on the cheek, something his predecessor would never have done in public. Times were changing, as were laws. Ingrid and Frederik had 3 daughters in their marriage, Margrethe, Benedicte, and Anne-Marie. Since the king and queen had no son, according to the Danish constitution at the time, this meant that after Frederik's death, the throne should have passed to his brother, Prince Knud, and then to his son, Ingolf. It should be noted that Knud and his family were far less popular than the crown prince's family. In any case, the law of succession was changed. Some claimed that Queen Ingrid personally influenced Danish politicians, which ultimately led to the Danish parliament revising the constitution in 1953, but these were unproven allegations. However, the amendments to the constitution granted the princesses the right to inherit the Danish throne. In other words, Knud's prospects of becoming king of Denmark were radically altered in 1953, just as the future of the 13-year-old Princess Margrethe was radically changed. Now King Frederik and Queen Ingrid faced the important task of preparing their eldest daughter for her future reign. Being potentially the first reigning queen since Margaret I, she would one day become the monarch of Denmark. But how did the lives of the king and queen unfold? Initially, there were some conflicts and rough patches in the relationship between Ingrid and Frederik, but over time, their very different personalities became a kind of advantage. They realized that they complemented each other perfectly. They learned to mutually benefit from their differences. Frederik, by nature, was an emotional and straightforward person. For example, he could be quite blunt, more so than was customary in the royal household. Ingrid, on the other hand, had great self-control and could appear calm and always correct in her interactions. She herself claimed that she truly got angry only once every 5 years. Ingrid's presence in Frederik's life greatly contributed to him behaving more royally and more dignified and confidently in his role as monarch. It should also be noted that Frederik influenced his wife, making the queen more open, teaching her to smile more and behave more confidently in society. Ingrid herself said that Denmark taught me to smile. As a couple of heirs to the throne, they began to find a balance between popularity and the duties imposed on them by the kingdom. Over time, Frederik and Ingrid managed to replace the strict and old-fashioned customs of the royal household with more modern, warmer, and more humane ones. Ingrid earned high regard from the public for her contribution to this endeavor. If the focus had previously been primarily on the king, now the entire royal family was in the spotlight. This shift in the perception of the monarchy in Denmark naturally went hand in hand with the country's overall social development, which took place from the 1950s onwards. The Danish royal couple skillfully fulfilled their duties. Over the years of their reign, the constitutional monarchs made numerous official visits representing Denmark at many meetings and during various representative missions. But every day at 4 o'clock, the royal family would have afternoon tea, a tradition Ingrid had maintained since childhood. King Frederik IX, who, despite his love for sports, did not shy away from some unhealthy habits throughout his life, fell ill in 1971 and unexpectedly died on January 14, 1972, thus ended Ingrid's time as queen consort. Together, they had brought modernity to the life of the Danish royal household. Together, they had won the hearts of the Danish people and, most importantly, ensured the succession of the throne. On the same day that Frederik passed away, their eldest daughter was proclaimed Queen Margaret II of Denmark. When her husband passed away, Ingrid became a relatively young widow at the age of 62. She continued to be called Queen Ingrid. When her father, Swedish King Gustav VI Adolf, died on September 15, 1973, it meant that Ingrid had lost the two men who meant the most to her in less than 2 years. But life had taught Ingrid from a young age to cope with heavy losses and grief. Even in these times, she demonstrated excellent composure. As a widow, Ingrid had to move from Fredensborg Castle to another residence, which she furnished to her taste. The widowed Ingrid invested much effort in landscaping the park adjacent to the residence. Although her formal status had now changed, Ingrid did not cease serving her country, continuing to participate in Denmark's life. For some time, she still lived an active public life, though a bit less intensively than before. At Grassen Palace in southern Jutland, Ingrid gathered the royal family around her 10 grandchildren. As a grandmother, she became an especially important mentor to the new Crown Prince of Denmark, Frederik, the eldest son of Margrethe, born in 1968, and recently crowned King of Denmark. Ingrid never forgot her origins and continued to take an interest in Sweden. For example, her daughters recalled that throughout her life, their mother read a Swedish daily newspaper every morning. The moments when she gave public speeches became rare. But on the occasion of Margaret II's 25th anniversary as queen in 1997, she surprised the Danes by making an exception. The concluding words of her speech were, "And Daisy, you have 2 wonderful sons, so I think I can safely close my eyes now, knowing that they will do everything required for the good of Denmark." On November 7, 2000, Ingrid passed away in her sleep. She died at Kansellehuset Castle in Fredensborg, surrounded by her large family.